Is anybody trying?
Yeah, but Suzanne's typing something in the chat area.
Good morning. This is Suzanne. I just sent a text message through the chat box, but I wanted to put it out there that John did help me set up so that I can talk live. It's not really difficult. He's an expert, so take courage and jump in there and let John help you. Thanks. What?
That's no problem, Gail. Hopefully this is an open invite during the community of practice for everyone for further webinars that we put on. So if next time you participate and you have a microphone headset, it'd be great.
Yeah, it would be awesome if we could talk to each other versus typing in. So we'll work on that for the future.
So for the new people logging on, we're going to try to experiment with audio today. I see Tom, you have in there. If you wouldn't mind, I'll try to activate your audio and see if we can get any kind of feed from you. You should see a microphone icon, upper ribbon show up. Click on that, turn it green, and then you need to click on the arrow and select your headset in the list. Select microphone. I think I hear something.
Looks like Tom has a microphone next to his name, so it looks like maybe he's signed on.
Yeah, we're activated on our side. There's a couple things that Tom needs to do. He needs to allow the microphone to connect to Adobe Connect, and also make sure that he selects the microphone under the icon drop-down menu. And the last thing is that microphone needs to be green on his side.
Okay, my microphone is green.
Wow.
Oh.
Hi, Tom.
Morning.
Morning.
Tom, if you can position your microphone a little closer to your mouth, I think we can pick up your audio a little better.
Okay, how is this? Is that any better?
That is excellent.
Loud and clear. The
Loud and clear, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm wearing headsets today, so otherwise I wouldn't be able to hear the audio.
Well, that being said, first success story on the audio integration. I'm excited.
All the way from Alaska?
Yeah, we'll take that.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump right in. I want to say happy equinox to everyone. We are excited here to bring you the community practice through AIVRTAC. We have Dr. Carol Bergquist here. And we discussed a little earlier that I should probably go through how to navigate Adobe Connect for those new today. So what I'll do is I'll explain the pods. Those are all the different information areas on your screen. You might see some 4 arrows at the top of some of the pods. At that point, you can click on that arrow and you can make that particular pod full screen. We usually have a live listen-only webinar, and that means that individuals can participate with us in the chat area. So you can put comments or questions in the chat area, and I'll be monitoring that. And at different times, I'll be able to tell Carol whatever is in the chat area, question or comment, back to you. At this point, this is our first time that we're live with a participant. Thank you, Tom, for going through the process with me. It is also open to anyone else out there. If you have a headset or microphone, just put something in the chat area and we can work in the background to sort of activate your audio. So thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to hand this off to Carol.
Okay.
And thank you very much for being here. And again, if anyone needs to talk to me, place anything in the chat area. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Here we are again, broadcasting, webinaring from Northern Arizona University, the AIVRTAC program. Suzanne is here, also live in her office, and Dr. Lee Gassioma is also in his office, but I'm not sure that he is. I know he's alive, but I don't know if he's live. Anyway, today is a community of practice, and for those of you who don't know me and maybe weren't on the seminar or webinar, on Tuesday, I'm Carol Bergquist, and I'm the Director of Vocational Rehabilitation Services at Hannibal Indian Community in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And I have been the director since we were initially funded in 1995, and I've worked for the community for almost 30 years. So welcome. The purpose of our meeting today is to discuss any of the concepts that were presented during the webinar on Tuesday. And then toward the end, we will also consider how we can keep our conversation going through maybe some additional ongoing community of practice sessions for specifically for directors. So I would just like to open up the discussion from the webinar on Tuesday, in which what I had done was I interviewed 10 directors that had been with the programs for 10 years or more. And there were 10 people that were interviewed, and I took the results of the interview and put it together and put that into a webinar. And the discussion focused around implementation. So I'd like to open it up for anybody with questions, either through the chat box, and even with my new glasses, I can't read the chat box from here, so John will be interpreting from the chat box. So are there any questions or discussion topics? And the answers don't come from me. They come from our community of practice, so that's you as all the participants.
Carol, this is Suzanne, and one of the things that struck me profoundly was how you addressed transforming public VR to AIVRS that occurred in at least 2 levels. And when I was looking at the first level, changing that federal state urban system into AIVRS rural system, I came up with, how do we change that? Or do we want to change that? You know, without working in isolation. For me, I remember how frightening it was. There was just, you don't know whether you're doing something right or something wrong. How can we change it so that people aren't in isolation? Are we looking at changing it for all directors? Are we looking to change it for new directors? Do you or any of the participants have any comments or ideas on that?
I could start while people are either maybe typing in. What I was really amazed at when I really sat back and thought about the development of all of our programs is that, we were all responding to an RFP from RSA, and we wrote in how we were going to implement this tribal vocational rehabilitation program in our community. And I know when I wrote those first applications, I had no input from anyone. I didn't know anybody else that was doing it. I didn't know RSA. I didn't have a name of anybody to call, so I just made it up, what I thought would work at Hannahville from what I knew, and my background is in vocational rehabilitation, but what I knew. And then I think that's what we all did, especially like we were funded early, like in 1995. But even now, there isn't much interaction with the new site. We don't know who's out there applying. And so I think it was amazing to me looking back at the transformation is that how in 83 or so different sites around the United States, that when I interviewed directors, we had all done some things that were amazingly similar in terms of what we wanted to achieve and what we wanted to do with our programs to make them Native friendly.
Would that include Alaska?
Definitely.
Tom, maybe you could talk to that a little bit? Did we lose Tom?
Hello, no, I'm still here. I was just thinking.
I could hear that, Tom. I could hear you thinking.
We do have, we had 10 programs, and we had 11 programs, and right now, currently, there are 10 funded, I believe. Metlakatla didn't get refunded again during this last go-round. We do meet a couple of times a year as a consortium with the 10 to 11 programs, and we do have discussion. We actually share quite a bit of information. I know that when we've been writing grants in the past, I've provided information that I've used in my grants, and even given copies of my grants to people who are applying, just so they can have that information. But yeah, I think it's a great idea to have more discussion between directors, but I think it probably works a lot better in smaller groups where you can have more discussion. I think if we're going to be trying to do it with 80 or 90 people, that gets kind of chaotic.
That would be chaotic. And I think Alaska is a good example because, they're an isolated state more or less, but their programs in 10 or 11 have worked together, I think, pretty amazingly in terms of supporting each other, knowing who each other are, what they deal with. Even in interviewing the 3 directors that I did from Alaska, they talked about each other's programs. Like, I think, well, Tom's doing that, or, Dallas is doing that, or Amanda's doing that, or Gail's doing that. And so I know that there's a lot of knowledge and interaction from the Alaska groups, and maybe other states or regions have done that sort of thing too. Is Gloria on?
Yeah,
See Gloria up there? No, okay. Because Gloria in White Earth, Minnesota is one of the old TACE regions. Region 5 was our region. And although I'm the only program in Michigan, the Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan programs got together, and TACE would sponsor us for, maybe once or twice a year we'd have a meeting to get together, and we would be, honest with each other and do some sharing there as well.
So it sounds like maybe smaller pockets. How can, there are experienced directors out there, and experience doesn't mean that we have the answers for everything, because when working with individuals with disabilities or just working with people in general, we always come up with something different or unusual that we could share with. But I'm thinking about some of the new directors. Is there any way we could brainstorm to think about what do new directors need? Is there a way we could create a packet or a way we could create some kind of a talking circle for them on a regular basis while they're first getting started? Did that ever come up, Carol?
We didn't specifically talk about that as a topic during the interviews, but we have talked about that before in other groups. And part of it is we don't know who's out there and who's funded right now. Even I haven't seen a list from RSA about new programs that were funded yet for 2017. But that is certainly a way we can reach out through, I think, through KNAR, once we know who people are that got funded, we could maybe have a way of calling people, particularly people in their same state or local, more local area. And I think knowing to come to KNAR would be important. And the community of practice doesn't have to be a huge one group of a community of practice of 83 or so programs or 45 programs or how many people are interested. But we could really, I think, arrange to have smaller communities of practice that would be open and that would be available to people, and it would be up to us as programs and maybe with the AIVRTAC expertise to help contact these programs and bring them into a community of practice. Are there other ideas out there? Are we seeing any?
This is Tom Cyrus again. I know one of the things that I would have found helpful when I was a first year director would have been to have some kind of a handbook that, what kind of data collection should you have, what kind of record keeping should be in place so that when you go to do your grant reporting at the end of the year, that it's not, oh, I didn't realize I needed that, or because a lot of times, you don't have enough time to look at those kinds of things until you're actually sitting down and doing them. And if there was some kind of a guidebook for new directors, then I especially if you don't have anybody else in your program when you're new that has that experience, I think it would really come in handy.
And Tom, I'm thinking that would be good for newly funded programs or new programs, as well as people that move into being a director of a program when they haven't had experience with that program before, or maybe it's left in a way that they don't know what's been done or not been done, or there's no transference from the previous director to the new director. So maybe there could be more than one time that would be really helpful to people.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's, exactly what I was talking about, is to have that, because a lot of times, if directors leave suddenly, you don't know what their record keeping system was, or, how they were organizing their information for their reports. At least that's what I walked into.
Well, I remember the days before we had a data system that was designed for our programs, and trying to do those annual reports, counting up figures and without a database. And I can see the ease of having a database now for my annual report. There were other ways that in the webinar from Tuesday, there was a chart that kind of looked at the tribal VR versus state VR. And for those of you that have watched that webinar, I thought that was kind of an amazing way of things that we had identified that basically we all have pretty much done with our programs, and even not knowing and without having that communication with each other, that we've really done to modify what VR services are for Native people.
Carol, I want to share one comment from Gail Sorensen. She states, I was in the program for years before I knew about the monthly RSA TCON.
Sad but true, Gail. I mean, that isn't, there's no consistent way that information is communicated to people. And that's such an important part of connecting with RSA and connecting with other people are those monthly calls. And I think they've been, lately pretty consistent as I look back on, I don't remember exactly when they started, but from the time they started, they were pretty consistent on doing those calls once a month. At least that was a way for RSA to communicate to us, for anybody that was on the call. But then again, there was no way for us to know who wasn't on the call, necessarily. So that's a good point, Gail.
This is Suzanne. I remember when Zane and Alfreda would create agendas, and then oftentimes we would get a summary so that we could, because when you're participating in a teleconference, you miss so much if you're trying to write down what everybody's saying. And there was a lot of, sometimes there were regulations that were being discussed. So I think it's really important that the teleconferences are announced in a professional and consistent way so that all directors can participate. That's where the source of how we are to be directing programs come from, is from RSA. So
and lately they have done that, I think, quite consistently, and I think it's Jessica that does that, and she actually puts out a Google invitation that we can respond to, and I'm assuming that's their list they're putting it out to, so their list should be up to date and accurate. So hopefully that would alleviate the problem that like Gail and others had, but they did not know there was a call to even call into. And I know that she has provided some summary of the call after that. And we did not have a call this month because September is kind of a crazy month for us all, so it was canceled, but hopefully that will resume in October. The second transformation that directors talked about in their interviews and we talked about on the webinar was that once we had a program that was Native friendly in the terms of the way we arranged it and the process of vocational rehabilitation, we also needed to pull in things that would be culturally appropriate to our own communities. And I'm wondering if anybody out there has something to share about how they did that, or some other advice or comments on that. You have any responses coming in?
No comments yet.
Okay.
this is
Again,
Suzanne.
okay.
I remember when I was the director of the Fort Mojave Indian Tribe VR program, that was probably the most significant challenge, because I was not a member of the tribe. I was not affiliated with any tribe, and there are some things that are sacred and not shared with outsiders. So Dr. Lee Gashioma helped me understand that to be culturally sensitive is more than looking at history. It's also looking at what are you doing today? What is your culture doing today that's culturally sensitive? Is anybody doing anything in that regard? Looking at the 21st century, comparing it to historical traditions.
When I first came to Hannahville, that was before we were funded for the grant. But so I had been there for, say, 7 years before our grant was funded. But once we got funded, I actually invited everyone I knew to be a cultural, spiritual leader, an elder, to come to Visions, and we sat down and talked about how as we got this grant funded and what its purpose was, and how could we make sure that we were being appropriate to the culture of the community. And I got some really good advice that day, and I certainly put that into play right away because these were the experts, and they told me later that they were very appreciative of the fact that I just didn't open up this program and start doing it how I thought it should be done, that I was courteous and invited them to come. And I remember one comment was that, if you're going to invite me to come to a meeting, like, not to come to a meeting, but to come in for services from your VR program, and you make an appointment for 2 o'clock on Wednesday and then I don't come, that it's not, why don't you just say, I'm going to be here Wednesday afternoon. Why don't you come on down? And that would be much more friendly and appropriate to the way we operate. So it's not like if they weren't there at 2 o'clock, they weren't interested or non-compliant, like the state system would typically interpret that.
Gail shares in the comment, there are more cultural camps for subsistence, youth, sobriety, several different camps.
So Gail, could you talk a little more about those camps? Are they something that the tribe organizes? Sounds like a good idea. While we're waiting for Gail and others, I wanted to share another idea that one of our cultural leaders at the time, his name was Donnie Dowd. Well, it's still Donnie Dowd. He just doesn't live there anymore. But he said to me, he says, well, Carol, you've known me a long time. He said, would you consider us to be friends? And I said, yes, I consider us to be friends. And he said, well, if we're friends, why have you never come to my house? And I looked at him and I said, well, Donnie, I said, in my culture, I would not come to somebody's house without an invitation. And I would have not thought that would be appropriate, but I'll be there tomorrow. And that was a great cup of coffee we shared that day. It's got to be either Suzanne or Tom.
It was me. My microphone was on top of my head instead of by my mouth. Sorry.
Could be a problem.
Gail answered your question, and she states, each community defines the theme and activity. Youth would participate and learn how to process traditional food while learning soft skills for work.
That sounds really excellent, Gail. That's something we can learn more about from you, and maybe it was something we could get going in our own communities.
I have a question for Gail in terms of how are students or youth with disability, is there anything, any activities that are created that are special, or is it an inclusion? Is it I'm thinking of maybe, is there any separation between non-disabled or disabled youth?
I'm not sure if Amanda's on the community of practice today, but she had some good examples of working with youth while they're still in school, and so did Peggy when we were talking. Remember those two specifically. I think others did too, but I remember they had some really good examples. And Tom, I think you did too, actually.
detail rights, outreach, and include individuals with disabilities and are accepted as others.
So it sounds like it's open. Good. So inclusive.
And Tom adds, we have cultural camps as well, and they are inclusive.
Great, thank you. I'm wondering if Tom would, if he's still, is he still on audio? If he could talk a little bit about the subsistence work that their program has done.
Yeah, I'm still on audio. I'd forgotten I was typing.
Anyway, I was really impressed, Tom, with many of the things that I learned, and I just thought that was pretty awesome.
One of the things we work with when we're looking at transition students, to keep on that theme for right now, is that when I'm involved in IEP meetings with teachers, we often look at, or at least the school, they sort of have more of a, their focus is more on education and training for more competitive job markets. And in our region, the reality is that most individuals want to stay in their home communities, and if they don't have the opportunities to, we have very limited jobs. There's jobs at the school, there's jobs at the traditional councils, and there's jobs in the city councils. So probably in the whole community, there's probably 20, 30 jobs tops. So most people live a subsistence lifestyle. And if you're dealing with someone who has a disability, one of the things that we need to look at is where do they fit in the subsistence lifestyle? Where are they comfortable and being most successful? So when we're dealing with students, we try to if they need mentoring, we can work with traditional councils to see how we can get that person to, if they need to be, they might be a net mender. So can we get someone to work with them that, or do they need to learn how to dry fish? So we try to set up those kinds of experiences. We also look at different kinds of opportunities that happen in the community. Like if there's a death in our community, it's kind of a community-wide grieving process where we have a cookhouse is set up. So there's people who prepare the food, there's people who bake bread, there's people who do the dishes and haul water and those kinds of things. Then there's another group that are grave diggers. So they're operating like in Alaska, we bury people year round. So there's jackhammers to, break up the frozen tundra and stuff. So there's that kind of job experience. There's people who make the coffins. There's women who line the coffins. There's someone else who might make the pillow. There are people who, construct the cross and put the names on it and stuff like that. So it's always a good idea to get the students involved so that they're feeling like they're giving back to the community and have a part. Other kinds of things we look at as far as mobility, how do people get in and out of their boats, or, we travel on snow machines, we travel on four-wheelers. Are they able to operate it? What assistive technology can we use for people who have some physical limitations as far as if they need to be cutting fish, and do they need to be sitting down, standing up? How do we write that into a plan? So those are the kinds of things we look at. As far as subsistence goes, when we're doing an adult plan, the way our program runs it, we look at, years ago, I'd worked in a cultural camp for recovery, and it was a family camp, and it was based on a calendar of activities that we'd sat down with the elders and sort of tied it all into the Inupiaq values. And from there, we looked at, like, starting in springtime. During this season, we need to make sure that our tools and equipment are ready for the breakup, and we're going to be starting to fish. And so your nets need to be repaired. You need to be making your drying racks and all those kinds of things. How many fish are you going to harvest? What kind of fish are you going to harvest it? And then how are you going to process that? Are you going to freeze it? Are you going to dry it? Are you going to can it? Then we look at how much of that harvest is going to be used for personal family use. Is it about 80% or so? You're going to give 10% to elders, and then reserve another 5 or 10% for community potlucks and those kinds of things. So we look at that for, like, geese and duck hunting season, and birds, and caribou, moose, and all those kinds of things. And some clients, not all, like to look at it, translate it into what's the added value to their family, the added value to the community, and you can sort of price it out if you look at how much beef costs or how much a goose costs if you buy it in a store, and you can sort of say, well, I'm going to be processing 300 pounds of salmon, and you can say, oh, this is I'm going to so you can put some economic value on it. We don't put a lot of emphasis on that, but it's interesting for people to look at that. Yes, this is a job. It takes me this many hours to do it. And so if I was going to translate it into money, you can sort of say, this is how much I got per day or per hour as a result of this subsistence activity. Then we also look at other kinds of resources they might have, and how we can either use the byproducts, like the fish guts and those kinds of things, to use for fertilizer in gardens. We look at any kind of purchase, like if they needed a meat saw or they wanted to build a drying shed, we could you use that for other people in your community to either rent that space out or barter for something that you don't have. That way you can also have more economic value that way. What are things that other villages have in our region? Like the village I live in, we're upriver, but people oftentimes barter caribou meat and whitefish for muktuk, which is from the whaling communities of Lake Point Hope and Kivalina and Kotzebue. That kind of thing is how we approach that.
I think it was really amazing. I just enjoyed talking to you about that. And I know one of your challenges was, how do you translate subsistence lifestyle to meet the federal competitive employment requirements that we have? And you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think that's how you translate it, and you do some advanced planning. Like, I'm going to be getting 300 pounds of whitefish. I'm going to process another 200 pounds of salmon, and most of it we don't usually use pounds, but we do it by fish because people often seine or have a gill net out, and so from there you can look at you can make estimates of how much time is that going to take you to do it, and then you can also look at, well, I have all this, if I have 300 whitefish and they weigh 4 pounds each, you can translate that then into poundage, and then you can look at if you were going to buy fish from the store. Well, we don't sell it here in the stores, of course, but if you were going to buy it like in Anchorage or something, how much would that translate to? And so you can say, well, this is if it's taking me 80 hours to get that fish, and another 40 hours to process this fish, then you can sort of translate that into an hourly wage. And so that sort of gets around those kinds of requirements that the feds are looking for. I don't know that I don't think that Sarah in Nome gets that detailed. She does it a different way, but this works for me and my clients. So then we also look at other kinds of things. What kind of equipment and materials do they already have? Like they might have a boat motor, but they might need life jackets. They might need a new seining net. And then we look at how we can support that either by buying, if they need motor oil or gasoline, we can provide that. We can buy the nets as well, and those kinds of equipments. We also look at how things are processed and how we can, supplement what they already have. They might have all their guns and all their knives and those kinds of things, but they might need Ziploc bags to store the berries that they pick. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes. Does anybody else have any questions for Tom?
I'm going to catch up on the comments a
Okay,
little bit.
some comments have come in.
Suzanne has a question out to both Michelle and Tom. First, Michelle's question is, do you have anything to add about youth camps? And then she asked Tom, how does the public VR work with you on subsistence? Covered. But Gail adds a comment. Alaska Disability Law Center wrote an excellent letter recognizing subsistence in Alaska villages as employment.
All right.
And that helped with auditors and other questioning expenditure.
Right. And those are usually things that I add in my grant proposal, are those letters, so that people who are reading the grant narrative and stuff like that, they don't have the experience and say, oh, that's hunting and fishing. That sounds like a lot of fun. But it's actually a lot of work.
I don't know, one thing all the Alaskan...
answer, I was going to say, to answer Suzanne's question about state VR. State VR, in my experience, hasn't done a lot with subsistence. If they, if they do, it's sort of like we're pulling them into it. But for the most part, they don't look at. I mean, they recognize it, but they just don't have the expertise. So they do work with us when we get a subsistence plan.
Thank you, Tom. And also, Carol, I think part of the answer, my question was answered when you were responding to something that Carol had asked, pretty close to the same question. So thank you. It's quite a dilemma, subsistence, and I think it's a very creative. I think that the Alaskan VR programs have been very creative in how they are able to work subsistence into this model that is not rural based, it's urban based. So congratulations, you deserve big kudos for that.
One other topic that all of the Alaskan directors talked about was the high cost of transportation and the cost of shipping things to Alaska and then out to the villages. And that would put a huge strain on their budgets, particularly when grants were flat funded. I don't know if any of the Alaska directors on today wanted to say any more about that.
Well, this is Tom again. There's, the transportation costs are, just eat up a lot of our budget. And even as far as, I recently was doing a subsistence plan with a woman who had a boat down in Anchorage, but she needed it to get it to the community of Selawik, and we're about that community is about 30 miles above the Arctic Circle, and so it's about 800 miles, from Anchorage. So it would have to have been barged up, and so in order for her to participate in subsistence, we needed to get the boat to Kotzebue on the barge, and then she could pick it up in Kotzebue and drive it to her home community. So the barge cost was I think like $5,700. So when you're dealing with things like that, it just it makes your plans a lot more expensive.
Yes, I can see that. Tom also had mentioned that I know he.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Tom?
Oh, I'm not sure what you were saying. Go ahead.
I was just going to comment on the fact that you had been a special education teacher in Alaska before you moved into your VR position. And that provided a lot of good background and experience for you. Is that correct?
Right. That's correct. I've been in this region now for almost 37 years. My wife and I moved up here when we were 25 years old and taught school in this region. And so, I have had the background and the connections in the school, which didn't really help me after I left the school. It seemed like the school was very, they seemed to think they were the only game in town as far as providing services to people with disabilities. And so it's taken me, I think, about 11 years now to get back into the schools and say, we can work together, and we need to understand that, when these folks complete their programs in the school, that there are supports available to them as they, enter the adult world. And so, I don't know how much it helped being in the school district for all those years. It didn't seem to pay out too much, but just perseverance. Where I have traveled all over this region for the last 30 some years, I know it's a small community. We're the size of Indiana area wise, but population wise, we're less than 8,000 people. And so, working in the disability community for all those years, I do know who's out there and what services are available. So I think it's more longevity than being involved in the school district.
And I also know that Tom and his wife adopted 5 children. 5 children since you've been there?
6 children.
6.
We have 6 children that we adopted. Yeah, community. So, so that we have that family connection as well. So that certainly helps. Yep.
Gail, that the cost of airfare from Dillingham to Anchorage is $700, and from the furthest village, Perryville, it's $2,000.
Wow.
And then the second comment, in one village, TVR assisted hard of hearing individual to get special education teacher job, and they are now principal.
That's an amazing success story. Gail probably travels out to those villages then as well.
Carol, I have a question.
Comments? It came through loud and clear, Suzanne.
Are you ready for my question, I guess? My question
yes,
is...
I'm waiting.
My question is this. What what sparked the interest to do this type of research, promising practices, and the difference between promising practices now and evidence-based practice? How do you look at this, the process that you've gone through, what inspired you, and what do you think about the future?
You're asking me personally, right? For my opinion?
Yes, it was your journey. You know, this was a great idea to gather. We don't have this kind of information anywhere. This is the first. It's a one of a kind. So, what brought you to this?
Well, right there. That was my inspiration, Suzanne. Right there. I think you summed it up because I've been a director for a long time, and I haven't seen anything like this. And I did mention in the webinar the other day that as I've gotten older, other people have gotten older too, and I see people that are retiring from programs or leaving for something different, and some directors have passed, and the knowledge that we all have seems to go with us if nothing's archived. And I feel even more strongly about this, having done interviews, and I wished I had had the time to talk to more people, but the 10 I talked to were truly amazing. And what really surprised me was how we had all taken, without a lot of direction, and requirements from RSA, we really had developed programs that were amazingly similar in many ways. And I put that into a slide today, just a second, maybe. Okay, and I tried to think about this because I know that talking to Dr. Ligasioma, who heads up the project here, there is a need for us to start documenting evidence-based practices, because that's something that's being called for now in a lot of grant applications, is that how do we know that this works? And so trying to take that and kind of superimpose that on the results from doing these 10 interviews. And so we were talking this week, and I've been thinking about that, that each one of if you look at it from a research base, and I just bumped the microphone, so if you look at it from a research base, that each one of our communities has been a social experiment, so to speak. This isn't how we looked at it, of course. We were providing services to people. But if somebody from the outside looked at it and we're looking for developing evidence-based practices, then could it be that how we develop so similarly and things that we did to make our program friendly to our communities, how we adapted that public VR model, and also how we incorporated all the native cultural, whether it's how we provided services or actual activities that we could incorporate into somebody's IPE. And this type of looking at this really you can look from looking from a research base that is really, say, 83 different programs that developed. So from these, could we look at that we developed so similarly, and that we provided so many of the same services and adaptations? Could we look at that as evidence for what works with tribal VR?
Lee adds to the conversation asking, how do the AIVRS programs view and define promising practices in TVR? Is this a new concept?
Does anyone else out there have a comment for Lee? While we're waiting for that to come in, we have about 10 minutes left. So in my opinion, I think the idea, although I've worked with evidence-based practices in terms of working in special education or in an educational setting, and that's kind of a requirement now for a lot of interventions that are being done with special education students, that is this evidence-based, is this peer review research, so to speak. And I have not seen that kind of concept applied to vocational rehabilitation from the general state side as well as from the tribal side, but maybe other people have.
Gail comments, no, I've read about it, but never applied it to BBNA TVR practices.
Okay, well, Gail, we're in agreement, and that would be a good question to ask, additional directors. And I know we have the opportunity coming up in just a few weeks that many of us will be at KNAR, and I'm really hoping that we can talk then and maybe continue the conversations through KNAR and other ways that we could get more information about it. Because I think this is something that might be more, one, required of us, and more, two, that we might want to do this to prove that what we're doing really works. I just posed a couple of questions, is our report of what worked, is that the beginning of what is evidence-based practice for us? And do we need proof that it worked? Is our personal testimony and our success of our programs and our consumers or clients proof enough? And how do we organize that into literature? Any comments coming in?
Michelle would like to add, to me, promising practices refers to those practices that seem to be working in communities. This would be the step before gathering specific information to make it evidence-based.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Michelle, then how would we, and I agree with you, but it's the step before gathering specific information. So how do we bring the two together? So I think what Carol has done with the gathering of chatting with 10 directors and you as one of them is the first step. This is the first step of creating something historic. How can we bring all of the ideas together, like what you're saying and what you do in your communities, and then gather the specifics? What are some of the specifics that you see that would be important for the continuation or for evidence-based, building the evidence-based? Sorry, long question. Trying to form it, make it simple.
To me, this is Carol. I'm waiting for responses. I thought the interviews were very effective, and they were also very efficient and cost-effective in doing this. And I think the more we can get conversations for more people, to continue doing maybe interviews, maybe I know that AIVRTech has done 4 project directors talking circles, and they are in the process of putting that information together. And I think between what we're learning from that, we'll have more and more insight too. And I participated in the one in Albuquerque last week, and I thought it was a great experience. And there was a lot of communication, and there were new directors there. I shouldn't say old directors, but directors with longevity with the program. And we had a lot of sharing going on, and a lot of questions and information came out. And I know there was a talking circle in Alaska and North Carolina, and I think Washington. So I'm wondering if anybody participated in those that's on the call today.
Michelle suggests maybe replicating promising practices from one community in several different programs, and then gathering data to see if it will work in different communities.
Okay,
follows
great.
Up with great. Thank you, Michelle.
Great idea. Okay, Michelle has another comment. I can say my new glasses are working.
Michelle states, I would be really interested in replicating Mary's greenhouse, for instance.
And that is an excellent example. I have visited Mary Maruvia in Mississippi with the Choctaw and her greenhouse program. And there are others too that have other directors talked about, like doing things such as like Tom did, like doing things that follow the seasons. And I know Peggy in her program in Georgia and Florida and that area talks a lot about the planting and harvesting, and so did Rebecca Holland in the Pueblo Jiménez right out here. So I think there's a lot of people that have done something similar, and maybe pulling those together too could provide more base for evidence-based. I think we have only a few minutes left, and I wanted to throw a couple of other ideas out there. And one is that we were talking about how we look at individual outcomes, but At the same time that we're working with individuals to be successful in employment, we're also contributing to each tribe's Native Nation building, or whatever that program is called, with your community. So most of our tribes have a strategic plan or something that looks at, workforce and economic development and how ways that we contribute to that. And my final comment, I'm going to skip down here, is I would like to know how we can keep the conversation going. We have resources available to us, particularly AIVRTech right here at Northern Arizona University. And can we do some focused kind of conference calls? We'll have the KNR meeting coming up. I'm just looking, and I know we don't have time to go into everything today, but just to put that question out there is, how can we keep this conversation going between directors and others about tribal vocational rehabilitation?
Lee adds to the comments, and he states, I see the need for AIVRS programs to become involved in research activities, as I don't know of any tribe or agency conducting current research on TVR, and its promise for the research to move forward to application. The final step in determining the research as evidence-based practice for AIVRS programs.
I think that says it all right there, Lee. And that's a whole new. Most of us have been. Our goal is working on quality services and programs and positive outcomes from the people that we serve, and to step back and say, okay, now after I think the Navajo was first funded in 1975, so we've had 41 years of experience. And how could we take that and maybe do some research on that and find those resources and people interested in participating? I think we've already had a couple people that said they were interested. Any other comments before we close for the day? And we do have a session tomorrow.
We do, 11 a.m.
Okay. And that is a follow-up. So that will be a time that we can talk about anything that's come up this week, any other ideas that you've had. And I want to thank everybody for, joining the webinar today, and thank you for your interest, and thank you for your comments and your participation. And Megwitch.
I just want to state that there's a link in the chat area to complete a survey for this community of practice. I believe there's an open comment section there, so any questions or comments that you want to place in there will be able to.
Yeah, that'd be great. And also, if you have watched the webinar and did not participate in person on Tuesday, or if you participated in person and did not complete the evaluation, that would also be very helpful if you could take the time. And that link is also open, John, right?
I believe it's still open. I'd have to check with Dana on that.
If not, put it in the chat box and we'll fix it for you.
I did. I placed it at the beginning of the chat conversation. So if you scroll up, you can see that satisfaction survey. I believe that she did not close it, but if actually, let me check right now.
Okay. And there is an evaluation for today too, right?
Yes, that's the link that I just placed in the chat area.
Okay, again. All right, any final comments or questions before we are no longer live?
It appears the survey from yesterday is still open as well.
Okay.
And then the survey at the bottom is for today's community of practice. And we'll be sure to send you an email to follow up this community practice and the survey link, and hopefully the upload to AIVRTech's YouTube channel and AIVRTech's website. You'll be able to watch this community practice by the end of the day.
All right, thank you, John. Any final comments from Lee or Suzanne?
Michelle says, great session.
Thanks, Michelle. I really enjoyed talking with you about your program. I learned so much.
Suzanne has a reminder for the survey, and then Gail says, thank you, wonderful session.
And I hope to talk with you tomorrow and see you at KNR.
Great session. Thank you, Carol.
Welcome.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Thank you, Tom,
Thanks,
for
Tom.
participating in audio. All right.
All right. I guess we're done.
Go webinar silent.
All right. Thank you.